Capital city of Texas, baby. ATX representing. Fatal, baby.
Falling on sixth on a Saturday. Can the drippin' swing a swing now?
All right. Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 3 of the Bacon and Egg Show. Doing things a little different. Probably going to stick with it this way going forward. We're going to be on YouTube now, which you would know if you're watching this. You're on YouTube. But this is technically our 3rd episode. Our previous 2 episodes are on SoundCloud. If you want to hear those, we can provide the link on the show page. But essentially, we're going to be going forward this way from here on out. You can get a good look at Jay and I. And I'm Kerry, by the way, and close personal friend Jay here.
What is up? What is happening, man? Happy Saturday, happy weekend. We made it through another one.
Hell yeah. We got a lot to hit on. So I guess we can jump right into this. So for those of you that are just kind of getting into this, if this is your first time listening to us, how we're going to kind of do this is we're going to kind of start off with the breakfast wrap here. We're going to kind of hit the previous week's news and kind of wrap some things up, especially the last couple shows we hit on NFL draft stuff, kind of some local happenings, UT sports, and just kind of the, some quick hitters on, recent things. And then we'll kind of get into some deeper discussion on some other issues and news happening in the sports world. But
the issues of the day.
The issues of the day, or during this pandemic, a blur of days or whatever unit of time we're working with. But from there we'll kind of see what feedback we're getting, and we're going to encourage people to submit some questions in the comments on this page, and we'll get to them the following show. Definitely encourage people to hit that like button and subscribe. Don't be shy. Smash it, tickle it.
That like button, subscribe,
touch it,
whatever,
caress it, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it'd be great.
So let's jump right into it. Let's do this breakfast wrap. Jay, let's talk about NFL draft wrap up. Let's hit on a couple teams here each who were the best for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reiterate what I talked about last week. I think that Dallas Cowboys top 2 draft. They were in the top 2 in terms of their result, in my opinion. From top to bottom, the value was there at every single pick. I think that they've made themselves better immediately, and are going to be a team in the NFC, especially in the NFC East, to watch out for, just based off some of these guys that they drafted that are going to be able to contribute immediately.
Yeah, they're going to score some points, I think.
Yeah, I can't – we talked about this, but CeeDee Lamb, the fact that he was still there at 17 for them, how giddy McCarthy and Jerry Jones were that he was still there. I don't think wide receiver was necessarily the direction that Dallas thought they were going to go. But when CeeDee Lamb is sitting there at 17, you take him and you're happy about it. And they are. They couldn't be happier. I think that immediately makes Dak Prescott, in terms of, if you want to talk fantasy football, he's a QB1. But I immediately think that in the actual game, that pushes Dak immediately into – I know he has to show it on the field, and I think this is Dak's money year, and I think he will with these weapons. But it puts him into a position to be very, very successful this year. Yeah,
there's no excuse, right? I mean, he's got every weapon at his disposal, still a really good offensive line. Yeah, it's a money year for sure. And Cowboys could either pay him before this season starts, maybe get a little bit of value out of that, or he decides to set the world on fire and command whatever he wants on the open market. So,
well, I think they're gonna end up paying Dak $40 million a year anyway. I just think that they put it off a year by putting the franchise tag on him. So I think he's gonna get his money eventually.
Yeah, and if I was to bet on it, it's probably going to be in Dallas. I don't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if he has the type of year that we're talking about, there's no way at all Jerry lets Dak out. There's no way he walks.
Not at all. Who was somebody that stood out for you?
So one team that I really I really like their draft was Arizona. Just without going into too much detail, it vaguely what they're doing there. It vaguely reminds me of what the Seahawks did years ago. I know Russell Wilson was a later round pick, but getting someone like Kyler Murray in, who was productive. I was doubtful, with his measurables and all that kind of stuff, but he's proven to be. He's going to be a force. Just the way that they're kind of building that squad. The Isaiah Simmons pick in the first round, that's another guy that even though that was at pick number, what was it, number 8, I think, like just the value that they get there at number 8 for Isaiah Simmons. And then you go down the list of it.
That guy will play in so many positions. He will be all over the field.
All over the field. And it's a guy that can cover just about every player on offense too with his, so I just love that pick from the get-go. But then you look at what they did went offensive tackle, defensive line, linebacker, and then a pick in the 7th round that I really, really, really liked was Eno Benjamin, who, a kid from Texas, wanted to go to Texas. Tom Herman went with Tennille Carter instead. We saw how that played out. But this is a kid that he graduated early at Arizona State. I think he was a Dean's List type student. And of course, he then gets drafted by the local team, and he's kind of a perfect substitute for Kenyon Drake in that offense. He's a pass catching back, just super intelligent player. And to get a guy like that in the 7th round, I mean, 1,000-yard rusher. And I think I remember seeing something like a 300 plus yard games, or maybe it was just one 300 plus yard game on the ground at Arizona State. But so I really like what they did. They're building a pretty good squad there in Arizona. So that's definitely one of my favorites. We'll see.
Is that a team? Well, let's hit on that later. I wanted to talk about the Ravens draft real quick. Going back, Queen at 28 is ridiculous value. He's going to come in and play immediately. He fits that Baltimore linebacker mode. He will fit in there perfectly. Then Dobbins and Matabuke from A&M there at 71. And then Duvernay at 92. All of those, and then they had 2 more 3rd-round picks too that were great. From 4 to 7, they just added pieces that are going to be able to build up their depth. And I think the Ravens are another team that the AFC is already very, very top-heavy, in my opinion. And the Baltimore Ravens just extended that gap to, in my mind, a little bit more.
Yeah, they made the top a little bit heavier. I mean, it's really hard to, whatever flaws that they had this offseason, they're starting to fill those up. And yeah, it's going to be a fascinating season for them. The second team that I really, really liked was Carolina. I know we've talked about we talked about Matt Rule and what he was able to build at Baylor, and kind of how this is going to transition to the NFL for him. But every single Carolina draft pick was on the defensive side of the ball. Every single one. They did not draft an offensive player in this draft. They went D-line, edge rush, safety, corner, safety, defensive tackle, corner. And especially in the NFC South, you got to face Breeze twice. You've got the Falcons, depending on what day it is, that's a team that can put up some points. And now Tampa. And if we've discussed Tampa in previous shows. Yeah. So to just go all in the draft on that defensive side of the ball, McCaffrey got his new deal. They brought in Teddy Bridgewater. They already have some weapons on the offensive side. I think Rule made it very clear in this draft what kind of team and what kind of culture he's wanting to have there. And I guess part of what I really, really like about it is that, I guess sometimes you get new coaches or new GMs or whatever, and they kind of hedge a little bit on what kind of organization they're wanting to build. And I think what Rule is doing is, he's not doing that. I mean, he's going all in on kind of what he wants, and he's being really straightforward. And we'll see how it plays out, but it's, I like the direction they're going.
To me, that's a guy that knows that he can go in there with those pieces in Carolina and make that offense successful. He knows that he can go in and use those pieces to his scheme and be fine. The defensive side of the ball needs the help, and the more defensive players that you draft, the better chance you have of some of those defensive players being able to contribute. So it was a brilliant move by his part. on his part to go all in there on the defense for the draft. Got some good players, and I think that, I'm very excited to see him at the NFL level as a head coach. It's going to be – I feel like he's going to be one of those boom or bust type guys. It's either going to really, really work or it's really, really not. And I'm really anxious to see how Carolina does this year.
Yeah, and on that note about, but at least he's taking a stance and going a certain direction with it,
Absolutely.
And that's
100%.
it's either going to blow up and be terrible, or he's going to look like a genius. So yeah, that's going to be fascinating. I just want to throw in one more kind of wild card, just a team that I found really intriguing in the draft, and that was the Colts. They didn't have a first round pick because of the DeForest Buckner trade. So their first pick was in the second round. They went with Michael Pittman Jr., the wide receiver from USC. So another kind of weapon to plug into that offense, along with T.Y. Hilton and kind of these receivers that they've, been able to utilize over the years. But the pick I really, really like, and another value pick, was Jonathan Taylor, the running back out of Wisconsin, who's just an absolute workhorse. And, we talked about the Dobbins, where Dobbins went to Baltimore and the value in that. In previous years, Jonathan Taylor's a first-round pick. With what he did at Wisconsin, with what guys like Melvin Gordon, the list of Wisconsin running backs we can go on all day about. But and the guy left school early, and he doesn't have as much wear on him as a typical Wisconsin running back has coming out. So I like those. But then what really fascinated me was also the Jacob Eason pick in the fourth round. They brought in Phillip Rivers. They've got a guy that and again, Phil is another guy that we've discussed, kind of boomer bust type quarterback. But to get a talented, super talented quarterback like Eason in, to maybe sit a year or two behind Rivers and learn the ropes, and also to have a coach that's pretty good working with quarterbacks. That one, it's those picks really just kind of caught my attention. We'll see how they work out, again, as always with the draft, but those are ones that could really put the Colts in a decent position going forward.
Well, and it's another one where they didn't have the first round pick, but they had 4 sixth-round picks, and it's like, okay, let's trust our scouting and let's take a bunch of these guys that can fill some holes for us and hope that one of them pays off. I love when teams can stockpile picks like that, and just throw those darts. It's when you're putting together a draft board, and there's always those guys at the end of the draft board, like, okay, it'd be really cool if we got a handful of these. Well, they just got 4 of them in one round, and I think that those are going to, any one of those guys could be successful for them. But that's an AFC South discussion too, because I think Indy just got better. But we can hit on that later when we hit a little more on the Texans.
Yeah,
but, but I think Indy did definitely get better in that draft.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify a little bit on what I like about that Michael Pittman Jr. pick was just, when we think of Indianapolis, we think of the T.Y. Hiltons. They drafted guys like Philip Dorsett. They kind of have this what was the last big possession receiver from in Indianapolis that you can think of?
Harrison.
Yeah. So they go and get a 6'4", 223-pound wide receiver in Michael Pittman Jr. That's a jump ball guy that can just go up over defensive backs. And it just adds a completely different dimension to that offense that we hadn't really thought about with them in a long time. And I agree. It's like Marvin Harrison's kind of the last guy that I can think of that's just possession guy. And so
one of the best, I dig what they did. That's Hall of Famer type of guy, but
yeah, but that's the thing. You think of them having these quick kind of almost like slot receiver types or just burners, and that's where right. to add a guy like Pittman into that, just that brings a different dynamic, I think is going to be interesting to see. So actually, that's kind of interesting on that note. We talk about big possession receivers. That's a perfect transition into one that the Longhorns got a commitment from this previous week. And Tariq Black, the graduate transfer from Michigan. He's to me, I mean, the thing is we can say we didn't see a lot of Michigan football, but on the same point, the guy had injuries for 2 years, and I think he only registered statistics in 3 games or something his freshman season. So he's really kind of an unknown. He was a big time recruit 4-star receiver that just because of injuries didn't pan out in Michigan. But I like the pickup. It's I guess the idea. I mean, obviously he's a grad transfer, so he's going to play right away. But he's being pegged as an immediate Colin Johnson replacement. I mean, how do you feel about that in terms of where that fits with kind of the current receiver core at Texas?
Kerry, you broke up a little bit there. Kerry. But I believe you were talking about Tariq Black, the wide
Yeah, you
receiver
got me.
from Michigan.
Yeah. Just that he was, he's being pegged as this Colin Johnson replacement.
You
got me?
It's a delay, and you're going in and out a little bit, man.
There we go. Is this better?
Yeah, I got you now. You there?
There we go. All right. No, basically just that Tariq Black is being pegged as like a Colin Johnson plug and play replacement. Big body, had the injury issues, which fits well with being a Colin Johnson replacement. But I guess my big question for you is, where does this kind of fit in the structure of who's coming back for Texas? And I mean, is this the type of player that the Longhorns need, especially with an offensive transition next season?
With players like this, I always just whatever we get out of them, any production that we get out of these sort of transfers in is a win. I'm not looking for this guy to come in and be an impact, like a super impact player. I'm looking to him to be a part of the offense. I'm looking to him to play a role, but I'm not looking for him to come in necessarily and be, you know, an all conference type of guy, but I do think that he can definitely come in and play a role if he can stay healthy. And I think that with another weapon like that, I don't think he's a world beater, but he's another weapon for Sam to have, that if he can be on the field as somebody that he knows he can go to in crunch time. So I think that that's where his role will be as, an older receiver, somebody that's been in some big games and can show Sam that if he's on the field, he can rely on him. And that's where I think he'll play.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily want to say it's a concern, but you always kind of, I guess with commitments like this, and I know it's a grad transfer, it's a short-term kind of thing. You worry about potentially the younger players that were in line to get more playing time this year. And I know there was all kinds of issues with the coaching staff internally last season, Drew Maringer and his attitude towards the receivers and those kinds of things that, almost led to players like Brennan Eagles leaving the program, and, Marcus Washington not being all that happy. And, does bringing in, you never want to turn away a former 4-star receiver, right? So, but at the expense of a younger guy, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. You just hope that the coaching staff that's now in place, you almost wish there's a little bit better personality management that can make this thing work. I mean, I'm not. That's not to say that I wouldn't have taken Tariq Black. I'm glad that a guy of his talent can come, and hopefully his injuries calm down and he can put it together.
I think that's where I think this is the year that we're going to see if Tom Herman, whether or not, I'm not saying he'll be fired this year, but this is the year that we'll see whether or not he's going to be the coach at Texas moving forward, or if he's, to us, he's the guy. And the reason for that is now he doesn't have any excuses. He's said that he's going to not be in all of the, he's not going to be micromanaging. He's not going to be, having to be in all of the meetings. He's going to be able to be more of a CEO. And I think that's when we talk about personality management, when we talk about, being able to be that guy that can put out fires within the team without having to also have so many other responsibilities. I think that this is how we'll know if Tom Herman's going to be the guy this year, because of that CEO mentality that he's going into the season with. If he has to get off of that at any point to either manage the offense or manage something's gone horribly wrong, and we won't get the result as Texas football fans that we would want to see this year if he has to, leave that CEO role and go into managing other things. So I think that's where we'll learn a lot about Tom Herman this year.
Yeah, things will definitely have gone extremely sideways if he's stepping in to call plays with a guy like Yuricich in his first season in the program that's shown success elsewhere. And if that has to happen, all bets are off.
Right.
One last thing, I guess I just want to just pinpoint one last thing. Texas got another commitment this week, besides the Tariq Black one, but this one actually is for the class of 2020. And it's Jade Barron, another 4-star player that was committed to Baylor. I'm not sure about all the ins and outs of how and why the national letter of intent was released. But he's a local kid. He's from Pflugerville, and he's going to be joining this most recent signing class. And, all accounts say he's a guy that's going to be ready to contribute right out the door. So another big pickup for defensive depth, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. So an active week for the Longhorns with players that are going to be able to step in on campus when, going into our kind of next subject on this, when campuses do open and players and students can actually return. So on that note, Jay, do you want to discuss a little bit about the news this week regarding college campuses?
Yeah, the entire A&M system, I know, they're saying we're going to reopen in the fall, and Texas Tech is sort of right behind them. I know for a fact that there are some people that do not feel very strongly that should be the case, but it seems like there are certain universities that are very intent on making that happen. I talked about this last week. I'm not going to any football games this year. I'm not going to any basketball games when basketball season rolls around. I'm just going to be very cautious, and that's just a choice that I'm making. But if A&M has a football team on campus, but 9 other teams on their schedule don't have football teams on campus, how are you going to play a football schedule? That's, to me, that's, I appreciate the thought of being able to, by this time we will have this under control by the fall, and we'll be able to get back to normal. I hope they're right.
Yeah.
I think that this is just, and this moment in time, I don't know how bought in I am to the fact that these campuses would be ready to hold football games in the fall.
Yeah, I agree. I heard something interesting, and I don't know how this particularly breaks down to each kind of university system here in Texas, but it was A&M and Tech, and then the next, originally UT said they were going to wait till the end of June to make a decision on the fall, but then they even said it looks like they're things that are going to be a go for the fall. Texas State said they're going to be a go for the second summer session in July. So they kind of, they said, hold my White Claw, and kind of jumped out in front of that. But I heard something interesting though about why that is, and we're recording it's May 2nd today, so this is all fresh news. But I heard something about, I guess, university systems are, in terms of deposits and declarations of enrollment and things like that, May 1st is the typical deadline for the fall, and that if students haven't, that's kind of the deadline for students to put deposits down and all those kinds of things. So that there was kind of this push from university systems to at least say we're planning to be open for the fall, in an effort to try to encourage students to get those deposits and all those kinds of things in. And if I guess the whole thing about that is that if the university system comes out and says, well, yeah, we're not going to be on campus for the fall, well, then what students that are going to be enrolling there for the fall are going to pay deposits and do all those kinds of things if they don't have to. So maybe it's just sleight of hand and wording that they're using to try to make it seem like there's at least going to be full classes or open campuses in the fall. But we'll see. It's interesting nonetheless, because we're talking about, if these campuses aren't open in the fall, there's no sports, plain and simple. At least that's what the Big 12 commissioner said. A&M and the SEC, we'll see. But kind of said, if campuses aren't open, there's no football.
You can't have football games if the campuses aren't open. That's just not. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why that would even be a thought. I know there are some people that would try and would do anything possible to get football on, get football played and get football on at least on television and get these games played. But I just don't. At this point in time, I don't see it being very feasible. We could get there. I mean, and again, I hope that we do. But at this point in time, I just don't see that being a thing by the fall.
Yeah, and I think when Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, said, I think it was this past week. You may have said this before, but it's, I guess in the Big 12's mind, it's not so much an idea of will the football season start on time. It's more of an issue of a future disruption as the season gets further into the fall and towards the winter. That what do you do? If you get a third or halfway through the season and flu season starts to come back around, the virus, rears its ugly head again, and you have to stop. What's the idea at that point if you have to put the season on hold? Then do you then push it out to the spring? So there's so many different things involved, and that's where I don't, given kind of what we know, I don't know if starting the season is that crazy. But how do you play a 12 or 14 week season from that point in its entirety? And we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would love it, but I just don't see it happening. I mean, no. That would be wonderful to be able to have football to watch, and to talk about. But I don't see it happening at this point in time. But we'll see.
Well, and I know we have a further discussion about kind of related to COVID and leagues around not just North America, but around the world kind of up and going. So before we dive too deep into that, I do want to hit on one more NCAA thing and what they did. My understanding is that it's passed. I don't know if there needs to be any other kind of votes from university presidents, anything like that, but the whole name, image, and likeness situation. It's about time, right? What do you think?
Yeah, no kidding. The whole Ed O'Bannon case. How long ago was that? It's been a decade.
20, maybe. I mean, probably around 2000. O'Bannon was at UCLA in the late 90s, right?
Yeah, but I can't remember when that lawsuit came out. Either way, it's that sort of got the ball rolling for this, and it is about time. And I think that the players are, the rules that are set out are very clear. You can't use Sam Ehlinger can't wear Texas gear in a commercial for a car dealership. He can have a football camp. He can run a football camp and get paid for that, but he can't do it wearing Texas gear. He's his own brand, which it's past time for that to have happened. Now, for me, my biggest thing is, I hear people say, well, this is going to really spread the gap of equality in cross-college sports because the Texases and I say, if it does, for me, that's all for the better because then that means the NCAA will dissolve or at least these bigger schools will break off and be their own deal, which is where long-term, that's what I'm hoping for anyway. But if people think that schools with money aren't already using their money to find ways to get players on campus, you're fooling yourself.
Right. And that whole premise is based on the idea that there's already not just like massive inequality throughout NCAA athletics. So come on. I mean, on that note, last week we talked about Greg Brown's commitment to Texas and what that is for for Shaka Smart's program. And I believe you said it was part of his G League offer. It was a 1-year deal with the G League for $300,000, right?
Right.
I find it hard to believe that he. And you know where I'm going with this.
What are you saying, Kerry? What are you saying? Can you spell it out?
Hold on. But maybe this name, image, and likeness thing has something to do with his decision and the timeliness of it.
Maybe.
Who's to say? And that's where I'm curious to see how this is broken out once it's actually implemented. But who's to say that he turns down the the $300,000 from the G League, right? He commits to Texas, and Nike, who outfits the Texas program, says, we'll match it. And you can do Nike ads and all those kinds of things. You won't have the Texas gear and all that kind of stuff in the ads per the NCAA's stance on this. But
The
who's to
thing
say that
is, though, is I don't
there's
know
not
if
some kind of case, situation there with that?
legally, though, this stuff wouldn't go in, I don't think, until the next school year. So, but if what you're saying, though, is that there have been a deal that said, hey, where Nike might have said, is that what you're insinuating, Kerry? Is that Nike might have paid a college athlete money to choose a school? Or is that what you're insinuating?
I mean, I've never heard of that happening before. So, it's all just, just pondering. But
Listen, man, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and we touched on it last week about how big of a commitment that was, how big of a get that was for Shaka Smart as a coach, but also as the runner of a basketball program, if you will, to be able to make that sort of a pull. And I do think that, maybe the guy just turned down $300,000 and decided he wanted to go to play for Shaka Smart. Maybe he
yeah,
did, but maybe he didn't,
maybe
guys.
he turned down
So,
$300,000 to go to class and for a
yeah.
year.
Yeah,
And
to play class. Maybe
yeah,
he did, but maybe he didn't. And so if you believe that paying college athletes money for their name, likeness, and image is going to just blow the doors off of the equality that was, surrounding the NCAA,
yeah.
I think you're mistaken.
Well, and again, I don't want there to be any confusion. I'm not saying that if Greg Brown turned down $300,000 and was getting something for his commitment to UT, that's somehow wrong. I think that
Oh, no, yeah, I see what you're saying. No, I'm
this
not
is
saying
not some kind
you.
of like indictment on Greg Brown or his family for being involved in some kind of like this shady NCAA business.
Nope.
To me, it's more of a reflection of just how backwards this whole situation is. The fact that we've been hearing about all the FBI stuff with college basketball and these things over the last few years. Like, it's all so ridiculous. They rake in all this money. The tournament rakes in all this money, and the players technically don't receive a single dime of it. So if Greg Brown, this is not, I don't want it to be some kind of like criticism. And I absolutely think, Texas should be playing that game. And they probably are, and I don't blame them a single bit, because that's how you get players and how you win in college athletics. And if anything, this name, image, and likeness stuff just brings it out into the daylight and gives it some legitimacy. And,
Right.
I don't know if you caught this or not, but you remember Jeremy Bloom, from Colorado, the guy that was a wide receiver there back early 2000s, I think, late 90s maybe, but was the Olympic skier.
Right.
And lost his eligibility for doing, ads related to his skiing for the U.S. Olympic team. And he spoke out on this thing this week saying basically like, it's great that the NCAA has finally come around to allowing this kind of stuff, but that he's also cautious in that, he says the NCAA is like really good at jumping quickly at something that becomes a hot topic issue. But then in how they implement it always ends up not being the correct way. And so basically he's cautioning people that say like, oh, this is great and this is going to open up so many avenues. Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see how they actually roll this thing out. And if anybody has any experience with the NCAA and this kind of action, it's him. So if I guess there is always the word of caution of the NCAA will screw things up somehow.
Absolutely. First I want to make sure I know you weren't saying that was wrong of Greg Brown. I think we're definitely on the same page with that. But with the NCAA stuff, that's what I've always told you is I will believe it when I see it. Like when I see Sam Ellinger on a Truck City Ford commercial, in a blue shirt or whatever, that's when I'll believe that this is going off as it should be in terms of those players being able to receive that money and and actually go out there and make money for themselves.
Yeah.
Until I know it's happening, I totally agree. I think that the NCAA cannot be trusted with anything at all, period, especially when it comes to benefiting their student athletes
Right.
that bring in all of this money for them. So I truly feel like it's another step in the right direction. Now, if it will be executed as presented is another story. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So it's, time will tell, but it's still fascinating that, they sure found some urgency to get something done during this pandemic, where
Yeah.
this was like, oh, some big long drawn out thing that they just didn't have the capability of ever implementing. And then, yeah, we'll get this thing written up and knocked out in a week. It's like,
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine that.
So to kind of go back to something we had
Hey man,
discussed.
we never wrapped up the breakfast wrap. Do we want to officially close the breakfast wrap at this
Yeah,
point?
let's close. Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap
wrap
up.
that up.
Let's wrap up that breakfast wrap.
I think we'll keep that one to the quick hitters next time, guys. But we
Yeah.
just forgot to wrap up the wrap.
Yeah. So for the second half of the show here, now that we've wrapped up the breakfast wrap, let's go back. We're going to kind of get into a little deeper dive here. We're going to go kind of touch back on what we were talking about with football season and these campuses opening. And kind of not so much on the the NCAA part of it is a big deal, but let's talk more about sports opening. I mean, just obviously these things run through different times of the year. The NBA, NHL were the tail end of their season just about. Where do you stand on? Let's start there. Let's start with NBA and NHL, since those are the ones that were coming up towards the end of their run. Do they restart? And if they do, how do you foresee the setup? I mean, where do you stand on this?
I think they'll both restart. I think that there will be, whether it's, I know that there's been some crazy, not so crazy ideas at Walt Disney World. MGM Grand has been somebody that has contacted, I believe, the NBA. I mean, those are things where you can put a basketball court, you can put 6 basketball courts in an arena, and that can be. But the same with hockey. I know that there are whistles and things like that that are to be, but these games can be started back up in a manner that would allow it to be done safely. I believe that everything can be quarantined in a way that it can be done safely. And if that's the case, then I'm all for it happening. And I think it can happen. And I think it will. And they're working very hard right now to not miss any amount of time that they don't have to miss. There's so much money being lost right now, and there's so much money to be made on the other side of this that I don't feel like they will I do feel like they will find a way to get these games played. And I'm not 100% sure how they'll do it. I don't know if a Disneyland idea can work. I don't know if some of these bigger parks or campuses or whatever it might be, I don't know if that can work, if that is the answer. But I do feel like that there's so much money to be had at this time, or so much money being lost at this time, I should say, that they will find ways to get it done.
Yeah, I agree. I think out of the two that we're initially discussing, I think the NBA's got the best shot of coming back and completing a season and doing that for those like logistical reasons you mentioned. It's you only got 10 players on the court at one time. Benches aren't that deep. Staffing is not that much. I think they can work that out. I guess my biggest question with both the NBA and the NHL is that, if depending on when the restart does happen, what does that do to what would be the following season? Does it just jump right into the fall where the new seasons would typically start, or what are we looking at in terms of the following season? But that's something I think that they'll work out down the road once they're able to actually complete. I know the NHL has talked about, there's been some ideas thrown around about having like essentially 4 regional arenas hosting rapid kind of tournament style play to either finish the season or expand the playoffs to some degree to where, they have, a ton of teams. You know, they instead of the traditional 16 teams in, it's you know, they allow 24 or something of that sort. I mean, I think it'll happen. I think they'll both come back and complete it some way. I mean, you know, I know there's talk about how they need the fans in the, you know, to be able to complete these kinds of things, but and I can say from experience, I play hockey once a week in an empty building, so I think they can get it done. Um, but they so I think those two will go. I don't know. I think the NHL thing's a little
Sorry, I
more.
meant to say you play hockey well in an empty arena.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, I don't know if we play well, but you know, we're used to playing in empty buildings, so you know, I think
You
the NHL
definitely
can
play in
live with
empty
it.
buildings. You got that part right.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. There's nobody there watching us, so it's so that's I don't even think our own team is watching. So it's but they I don't know. I'm a little less confident in the NHL just from the logistics side of it. We'll see. So from that, and I guess, you know, I mean, that kind of, I don't know. I saw a little bit of LeBron's quotes on the NBA reopening. Do you want to hit on that a little bit more and kind of fill me in on that?
No, I just think, LeBron coming out and saying nobody should be canceling anything is very much a LeBron thing to come out and say. I understand why he would definitely not want the season to be canceled, because this is one of his last opportunities to go out and get a championship. So he doesn't want that season to go to waste. So I totally get why he would come out and say, or would advocate for the season to not be canceled. And I think that, that's more of where he was coming from anyway, but it just
Yeah.
sounds like a very LeBron thing to come out and have said, sort of a league spokesman, like, no, we want to get this done. So let's make sure that it happens because I'm LeBron. And I don't even have a problem with it at all. It's just very LeBron of him to do. And that to me was, it's typical LeBron.
Yeah. Usual.
Yeah.
So, and we'll hit on, so some, we talked about the NBA and NHL and how they're, kind of towards the tail end of their seasons. Another area in the world that's at the tail end of their seasons is the European soccer leagues, where, and we're seeing just a piecemeal form throughout Europe, at least, of what these individual leagues are deciding to do, to kind of wrap up or, restart the seasons. Just this past week, French league opted to just cancel the rest of the season, crown PSG champions, and essentially use a point per game format to determine placing in the standings and for relegation. The Netherlands canceled the season and just left the teams in place, but didn't crown a champion, and nobody got relegated. At least I believe they didn't get relegated. I think they just left it as is, and the following season will basically restart. England's talking about restarting and finishing out. Where do you fall in the spectrum of these leagues restarting, canceling, negating, delaying, however you want to call it? Where do you stand on all this?
I've got no problem with leagues that are deciding to cancel completely and go based off of exactly what has been done up to this point. That would be my preferred method to handle these sort of, because it goes into what you were saying earlier about, when would those leagues the next year start, right? So being able to start that next season on time, get everything ready that you need to get prepared to start next season on time, rather than having this pandemic leak into 2 seasons back to back. That to me is, the NBA, you can't stop playing because there's a playoff to determine a champion.
Right.
In the soccer leagues, for the most part, they go by how many wins and ties and how many points you've accumulated.
Right.
And then, but like you said, it's easy to go to a points per game system. But for me, if it's a soccer league, I'm canceling now and going on a points per game or whatever. I would find a way to crown a champion, and and then just get ready for next year. That's what I would prefer these leagues to do.
Yeah, I mean, the notion of restarting a league and playing it out is attractive. I mean, the idea of, you know, especially since the Euro tournament's been canceled, there's essentially all the summer requirements that were going to be there for players of varying levels is gone. I mean, the idea of saying, hey, we can start this back in June and run this thing out to its completion is an attractive idea. I mean, the only thing with that is that the safety's paramount. I mean, you can't just roll the players out there in empty stadiums. There's so many things that go with it. I mean, I know they were even talking about in England, like kind of having secret stadiums, not putting out anywhere, any idea of where some of these games would be played. That's going to leak, and you're going to have fans from whatever clubs are playing mobbing those places. I mean, I know the mayor of Liverpool said the best thing right now is just cancel it, give Liverpool the title, and let's get this over with. Because if they play at Anfield behind closed doors, the idea that a bunch of Liverpool supporters are not just going to mob outside of the stadium, you're being naive.
Well, you either at that point, if you're playing games, you put them on television.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to. Maybe you don't tell people where they're being played, but you'll be able to tell really quickly in an empty stadium by the way that it's set up where they're playing, right? So I think if you're gonna play games, you have to air them on television. People have to know where the games are being played. You just have to do a good job of keeping your security around there and making sure that people are following whatever rules or restrictions are in place for them. But it doesn't make sense to me to even try to do it. Like I don't understand. Especially in a league like the Premier League, there's no doubt who the champ is this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's where it's almost similar to the French situation where it's clear cut. France, it was very convenient, as it is most years, that PSG is in a spot to where if they just call the season, they're in that position to just walk away with the title. And I don't think any other club would have too much of an argument. I mean, the Premier League's like that this season. It's Liverpool's ran away with the league. I think where it gets interesting, we start talking about relegation, and with a close relegation battle at the bottom of the table, how fair is it for those clubs to not be in a position to put up a fight, especially with, I forget how many games are left to play. I mean, but I think that's just about the only argument I think you can, when it comes to European positions. There can be a discussion made there about the fairness of just calling it. We're not giving those clubs an opportunity to fight their way up the table. However, it's kind of an unprecedented situation. I mean, but that's why also the Dutch situation is intriguing to me because, if my understanding of it is absolutely correct, the fact that there's no relegation, and it's kind of not wiping it totally clean, but the clubs at the bottom aren't being punished for this pandemic happening. But
you either got to go all in or all out. In my mind,
yeah.
I think you're either gonna treat the season as it was played, and you crown 1 through 20 or 1 through 40 or however many teams are in your league, and I think in my mind you still follow the rules of relegation. If you were in the bottom 3 and you get sent out, I'm sorry, like this is unprecedented, and you didn't get an opportunity to fight for your spot. But what else are we supposed to do? So you either do that, or you obviously you go the other direction to where there are no relegations or promotions at all.
Yeah.
And so which way do you go? You have to go one way or the other all the way.
Yeah, and I want to say I saw that Leeds is already preparing a potential lawsuit to the FA if the situation arises that there's no promotion and relegation. They're sitting top of the league in the second division. They are on course to be back in the Premier League for the first time in a while. And I mean, I can't say, I mean, I can't say that I blame them for that. and that's where it gets a little tricky.
Do you think they can actually win that lawsuit?
Well, I don't know.
Do you think that that's something where you're fighting and you're doing everything you can, because even if you don't think, even if there's a 1% chance that you could win that lawsuit, you would do it because you would think that it gives you an opportunity to do that. So they have to think they can win it. But I think with this as being such an unprecedented precedent that's being set, I guess, with COVID-19. How do you rule on this? How would you even make a ruling on this? There's nothing to go off of. There's nothing really to base this on in terms of that sort of, that case.
Absolutely. And if the FA does go the direction of no promotion and relegation, the angst that they would receive from Leeds supporters would be matched by the celebration of, Aston Villa supporters that aren't going down.
Right.
And when we're talking about,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, well, when we're talking about, what promotion and relegation means, even prior to a pandemic to these clubs, it's essentially the survival. We've seen so many clubs drop from the Premier League, Portsmouth, Sunderland, Bolton, just the list goes on of clubs that were relegated and just couldn't survive. They've gone into bankruptcy and all those kinds of things. It's too bad, so sad, but also on the same side of it, the pandemic just adds a completely different dimension to that, where clubs are already going to be struggling, and promotion for Leeds could mean survival. Relegation for a Villa could be the end of their club. And I don't know I don't know the answer, and I don't know what the FA should really do about that. I think when we talk about the top of the table, give Liverpool the title. They've earned it. The clubs up there are going to be okay, regardless of if there's even Champions League or Europa League next year. But I think that's where these questions start getting really, really difficult, is when we're talking about the clubs that are just teetering on the edge of existence to begin with, and what do you do?
Well, when you talk about teams in the long history of the league as it is known, and you think about Aston Villa and how far back, in terms of the history that Aston Villa has, the history that Leeds has, when you think about one of those teams is going to not be happy. One of those clubs is going to not be happy with whatever ruling is made, and it's either Leeds not being able to be promoted to the Premier League, or Villa having to be relegated down to the next league, to the Championship. One of them is not going to be happy, and it's going to happen. Somebody is not going to be happy in every single one of these situations. But they're going to have to make a decision here, and I think it needs to be quick, just to get it done and rip the Band-Aid off, make a decision so everybody can start preparing for the next season and what's to come, instead of letting this bleed on any longer. Make a decision, what you're going to do, and if there's lawsuits, and there has to be time for that to go through to go through the courts as well. So get it done now and then deal with it and move on. Yeah,
I agree. And that's what you hit on, something that we'll kind of hit on, here in the next couple of weeks, future shows, and just, we're also talking about contracts and transfer situations and all these things with these clubs. And I completely agree that they need to figure it out, and quickly, but on the other side of it, it's kind of difficult with that. Is it too early to just say, yeah, we're going to replay, we're going to restart the season? It's almost similar to the thoughts here of reopening businesses and stuff like that in Texas, and opening campuses and those kinds of things. It's just fascinating on kind of a bigger perspective of, talking about these European leagues, which just rake in tons of money and valuable clubs and all those things. It's so similar to college athletics, where we talk about this pandemic potentially being the end of a lot of athletic departments around the country. And is this kind of basically the forces at play throughout Europe saying well, there's only a handful of clubs in each country that are financially viable to begin with, and they're going to be the ones to survive. And maybe in a few years, instead of talking about the Premier League, we're talking about kind of this European Super League that's been thrown around over the previous years. It's it's a shame, but the money's the money, and the inequalities been there, and is this just everything being exposed for what it is? And we just are all going to have to kind of live with the end result of it. But
yeah, and it's the same with college athletics. Are we going to end up with the big super league? Maybe, probably. In college, I hope so.
yeah,
Think about in European soccer, in European football, how a super league, just how that would, the quality of a football that we would see from a league like that. But then you also have, okay, would you have a Leicester City story coming from nowhere to win a league if you don't? But how often does that even happen anyway? It's like everybody loves an underdog, but nobody wants to watch an underdog. Anytime, who was that the one team that made it to the Final Four the one year that was, like a 13 seed, and they wear the green and yellow uniforms, I think. Nobody watched those games, that game they played in the Final Four.
yeah, nobody cared.
Everybody loves an underdog, and that's great. It's a great story. Nobody watches an underdog. People
Yeah,
want to watch the big dogs, the blue
yeah,
bloods play. And, I'm all for a good underdog story. But would I be upset if they formed the Super League and then,
right,
Leicester City can't win a Premier League title anymore if they don't fit into that? That doesn't bother me. I'm sorry.
yeah,
It's the haves or the have-nots, and you're either a part of it or you're not in the sports world anyway. And that, I think that from a sports perspective, from a viewer's perspective, from what I want to take in as a sports fan,
yeah. You want to see the
that
best thing every week.
that's the best quality every week. And
Yeah, and I think
that's the road I'm going down.
And I think that's interesting, like, and also in terms of, we talk about the financial stability and all this stuff. You're not hearing that about NFL teams. You're not hearing that about Major League Baseball teams. You're not hearing about the NBA and the NHL, over whether this pandemic is just going, to kill them. You're not hearing, oh, well, the Kansas City Royals are going to cease to exist because of this,
No.
or the Cincinnati Bengals, or,
Yeah.
the Florida Panthers, the Sacramento Kings. You're not hearing that, like, this is just going to destroy them. So I think this is also not exposing, but bringing into light kind of the value of having a consolidated league that kind of is insulated. They're financially stable across the board, where there's not this. I mean, we can make the argument about promotion, relegation, and all those kinds of things, but, like, I think you're kind of seeing the value in that. There's a security and a stability from every club in the our kind of big four leagues here that other leagues around the world and even in college athletics just don't have. And
There's something to be
it's
said for that.
fascinating. Yeah.
There's something to be said for that, and there's something to be said for how powerful these leagues are, and just how rich these leagues are.
Yeah.
And every single, there are teams that, they spend less on payroll, and they there's not a chance they're going to win a World Series or a division or whatever, but they're profitable.
Right.
And Major League Baseball makes sure that as a team, whether it's shared revenue or whatever it is, there's systems in place to make sure that these teams are profitable. And I would love, think about a relegation system in the NBA. Like if the G League, because there's so many G League teams now. When the G League started there, and it was the D League, and there were like 10 teams. Now basically every team has a G League team. So like think about having a promotion and relegation between the NBA and the D League, and you've got the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, who I believe are the Rockets G League affiliate. Let's say they win the G League and then they're in the NBA, but then the Kings, like you said, have to go down. I know it's crazy, and I know the arenas. I know that there's a lot to that, but I'm just saying, like, the safety nets that are provided because of the financial stability with those leagues are able to be in place because there's not a relegation system, right? And because they have that, like you said, you have the ability to suck on purpose, like the Astros did for such a long time, to get draft picks, because that long term you'll be able to be self-sustainable, and this will all pay for itself.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about these leagues, and that's why they're so powerful in that regard, because everybody's okay and everybody's doing fine through this. I think that's a great point that you made to bring that up.
Yeah, and I think related to that, tying it into what you were saying about the underdog thing, and that if the RGV Vipers were promoted to the NBA, um, how many tickets are those going to sell when they're in a on the road?
Yeah.
When if even if they're in Dallas or San Antonio might be different, but like if they're going to play the Phoenix Suns, how many fans in Phoenix are going to buy tickets to go see them play the RGV Vipers, who just got promoted from the G League? So
Yeah.
like people go, oh, that's a great story. RGV gets to go up to the NBA or the Austin Spurs or something like that. But then the
Oh,
fans
right.
are, people, they're not going to want to go see. They don't want to see that product. Like they don't care.
Right.
It
But
it
people
be,
still, but then when you think about the promotion and the relegation and in the Premier League, like people will go, like in Arsenal, people will go, if whoever gets promoted, people are going to go to Arsenal matches. That stadium's going to be full, and I bet most of those stadiums on any given weekend are full, no matter who's playing. So that says more about the quality of a. Does that say more about the quality of a supporter? Does that say like more about the fan base and this is what we want to spend all of our time doing? Like, what does that mean to you?
uh, quickly for me, it means that I think that there's a different community feel for the clubs there. We talk about in London, just the sheer amount of clubs that are just in one city, and how every town essentially has their own club or at least one club, like throughout the various levels. So I think there's the civic aspect of it is different, where we're here, you know, there's not, we're in Austin. We didn't, outside of, remove UT from it, but like we didn't have like a kind of professional like football team that's our local football team that, like in the NFL sense, you know, if you're in Texas, you either root for the Cowboys or you root for the Texans or the Oilers previously. And I think it's just the way, I think that adds the different layer to it, just with it's such a local pride or neighborhood pride, even
Yeah.
over there where it's,
It's a geographical thing, right? Because
yeah,
over there the leagues are so close together, and there's more clubs, and there's all that stuff. And over
yeah,
here, everything is so spread out, like you said. You have these fans that are, you know, they grew up in El Paso, but they're Cowboys fans, and well, that's in anywhere else in the United States, you're 5 states apart from each other from that same distance, so you're picking different teams. So like, how do you balance that out with? Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's just
yeah. It's not like we're that we're. I mean, would you declare yourself like a Round Rock Express fan first
right,
over the Houston Astros kind of thing? And
right,
maybe that's different if there was a case where the Round Rock Express are getting promoted to the major leagues and would play a team like the Astros or the Rangers or whoever. But like it's just that kind of different attitude to it. Like where it's very tiered here, where it's like you can root for the Round Rock Express, but it doesn't take away. It it doesn't mean that you're not a fan of the
right.
Houston Astros or whatever. So,
Yeah, sure.
well, Jay, we're up against it. We're an hour in. I know there's some stuff that we didn't quite hit on. Anything you
Man,
want
we
to
didn't
take a
even get
quick
into
shot at?
what Bill O'Brien would do today.
Oh man,
Hey, you know what, man?
that actually we might save that for the next show, because I think that's going to be that could be a really good deep dive on that, because his what they've done, what he's done,
Yeah, there's no
structuring.
they in that
Oh, it's
room. It's
him.
he. Yeah,
It's him. What he's done structuring that offensive line and various things is going to be, that's a fascinating discussion in its own right. So we might have to push that off for the next show, but
yeah. That that
there's a lot to get in there.
that video of him sitting there cussing at whoever he was cussing at. I think we touched on it briefly last week, but whoever he was mad at that trade that didn't go through Detroit, he was like cussing at whoever it was and storms off in the middle. That's like that wraps up everything about Bill O'Brien that I
Oh
think you
yeah,
need to know.
or him yelling at the
Basically,
fan,
yeah,
all
yeah,
that.
exactly. So, but yeah, we'll hit on that. We'll dive into some Texans draft stuff a little bit more next week, and what their offensive line is going to look like, and maybe Bill O'Brien will have done something else that we can add to the "What Would Bill O'Brien Do" segment.
I'd say the chances are pretty high of him doing that. So
I would say that they are extremely high.
like a
very
Deshaun
likely.
Watson trade, since they won't, they're going to be working on that contract, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I won't talk Texans ever again if he trades Watson.
Well, we'll see.
It's just gonna be a blank screen when you say anything Texans. I'm just gonna like cut off video.
well, I think this is a good one. We got some good stuff in.
Yeah, man.
I just for those tuning in for the first time or that follow the SoundCloud shows, like this, put it on the subscribe to it from the page. Please leave comments with questions, and we'll get to them in the next show. We'll make that a thing.
Let us know if there's something you want us to touch on regularly. If there's something that you want to hear about, we'd love to hear from you. Trying to get some stuff in place here, and we want to know what you want to hear. So let us know. And man, this was fun. I always look forward to this. We'll do it again soon.
Hell yeah, man. Let's do it. We'll do this next Saturday.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.
All right, man. Later.
All right,
Fatal, baby.
Falling on 6 on the